There's a moment that comes in the aftermath of an avoidant relationship that tends to shock everyone around you. You're no longer available, you're no longer reaching, you're no longer there waiting for the breadcrumbs of their attention. And suddenly, almost magically, the avoidant person's behavior changes. They start reaching out, they want to spend time with you, they're suddenly more present, more engaged, more interested than they ever were when you were actively trying to build a relationship with them. And you might wonder, what changed? Did I finally get through to them? Did they finally understand what they lost? And the answer is, not what you think it is. What changed is you. Not who you are fundamentally, but how you're relating to them. You've withdrawn your energy, you've stopped being the person who's pursuing them. You've stopped being the person whose happiness is dependent on their actions. And for an avoidant person, this is incredibly triggering. Not in the sense of bringing up difficult emotions, but in the sense of triggering their need to chase what they can't have. The dynamic has flipped, and now you're the one who's emotionally unavailable, and they're the one who's reaching. And they might even feel like this is finally true love. The urgency, the intensity, the desperate need to reconnect. But what they're actually experiencing is the neurological response to losing control of a dynamic they've been able to manage perfectly until now. This is perhaps one of the most psychologically disorienting moments after an avoidant relationship ends. Because you might start to wonder, what if I had just done this sooner? What if I had withdrawn my energy from the beginning? What if the solution to the whole relationship was for me to care less and need less? But that's a misunderstanding of what's actually happening. The avoidant person isn't suddenly capable of being the partner you needed. They're not suddenly secure. What they are is activated by the challenge of pursuing someone who's no longer pursuing them. They're experiencing what they think is love, but what's actually the addiction to pursuit that their nervous system knows how to manage. Understanding the psychology of the chase, avoidant people are often attracted to people who pursue them. Not because pursuit is healthy or because it leads anywhere good, but because pursuit feels safe. When someone is reaching for you, you maintain the upper hand. You have the power. You're the one who decides whether to let them in or keep them at a distance. There's no risk of engulfment because you're the one controlling the distance. There's no real vulnerability because they're the one who's vulnerable to you. You can always say no. You can always walk away. You have all the control. Think about what this means for the avoidant person. If you're pursuing them, then they never have to wonder if you're going to leave. They never have to experience the terror of real abandonment because you're doing all the work to stay connected. They never have to give anything of themselves that they don't want to give because you're already giving everything. This is the dynamic that feels safe to an avoidant person. The dynamic where they're wanted but not requiring, where they're needed but not necessary, where they can choose the level of involvement without ever risking real loss. But when that dynamic flips, when the person you've been avoiding suddenly becomes unavailable, something shifts in the avoidant person's psychology. Their brain registers you as a challenge. Their brain registers you as something they might lose. And suddenly, the motivation to pursue you emerges. Not because they've healed their avoidance, but because the rules of the game have changed. You're no longer the person they can push away and have return automatically. You're the person who might actually leave and stay gone. And that possibility, that real possibility of loss, is what activates their pursuit instinct. This is a really important distinction to understand, because it means that when the avoidant person suddenly starts pursuing you after you've withdrawn, it's not a sign that they've changed. It's a sign that you've finally presented yourself as a desirable challenge. The very things that kept you attractive to them, your emotional availability, your willingness to work on the relationship, your patience, those things might actually have made you a less interesting target to their avoidant nervous system. Because you were accessible. You were there. There was no mystery. There was no threat of loss. And for an avoidant person whose love operates through the neurochemistry of pursuit and capture, accessibility is actually a turnoff. The intoxication of being chased. If you're in the position where the avoidant person is suddenly pursuing you, it's important to notice what happens in your own nervous system. You might feel a sense of relief. Finally, they're showing up. Finally, they're trying. Finally, they understand what they missed. And there's a particular kind of intoxication that comes from being chased by someone who previously pushed you away. Because it feels like vindication. It feels like proof that you were right all along, that they did love you, that they do care, that the distance was their issue and not a reflection of how they felt about you. And this vindication is real. They do care, in their way. They did love you, or something close to love. The distance was their issue. But the danger is that vindication can trap you, because when you finally get what you've been asking for, their pursuit, their effort, their reaching toward you, it can feel like the relationship is suddenly salvageable. It can feel like now it will work, now that they understand, now that they're trying. But you have to understand what's actually happened. They haven't fixed their avoidance, they've just adopted a different expression of it. But this is where you have to be careful. The fact that they're chasing you now doesn't mean they've changed. It means they've switched strategies. Instead of avoiding you through distance, they're pursuing you through intensity. And both are expressions of the same underlying avoidance. They're both ways of maintaining control over the dynamic and avoiding the vulnerability of true mutual closeness. One strategy keeps them safe by staying away. The other strategy keeps them safe by being the one doing the pursuing, the one controlling the narrative, the one who can decide when to pull back. What often happens is that the person being chased, you, starts to relax back into the pattern. You start to respond to their pursuit. You start to hope that this is finally the version of them that can be present. You start to lower the walls you've built. You might even rekindle hope that maybe you were wrong, maybe you gave up too soon, maybe this is what they were capable of all along. And the moment you start to do that, the moment you show signs of becoming available again, the moment the dynamic threatens to shift back to mutual engagement rather than one-directional pursuit, that's when they withdraw again. The cycle restarts, except now it's operating on a slightly different rhythm. Now they have more leverage because you've already shown that you'll respond when they pursue you. Now they know the buttons to push. The avoidant sphere of equality, this is the thing about avoidant people that's hard to understand until you've lived it. They're not actually afraid of relationships. They're afraid of relationships in which both people are equally invested, equally vulnerable, equally dependent on each other for their emotional well-being. They're comfortable in relationships that operate on a tilt, where one person is chasing and one person is being chased, where one person is the pursuer and one person is the prize. Whether they're the chaser or the one being chased seems to matter less than the fact that there's a clear power dynamic, a clear structure that protects one person from having to be vulnerable. When you get healthy and step away, when you stop pursuing and start investing in your own life, when you become grounded and centered and whole without them, you're presenting them with something terrifying, the possibility of an equal relationship. A relationship where neither person is pursuing and neither person is being pursued. A relationship where two autonomous people choose to be together because they genuinely want to, not because one of them has created a desperate need in the other. A relationship where both people can say no without the other person falling apart. A relationship where vulnerability is mutual and no one has the upper hand. This is actually more terrifying to an avoidant person than any amount of pursuit or distance, because it requires them to drop their armor and be truly vulnerable without the protective structure of either chasing or being chased. It requires them to relate to you as an equal, and equals can hurt each other. Equals can leave. Equals don't need them. And those three things, the possibility of mutual harm, the possibility of abandonment, the possibility of not being needed, are the exact things that the avoidant person's entire defensive structure was built to protect them from. So what you see when the avoidant person suddenly starts pursuing is actually their attempt to restore the familiar dynamic. They're trying to recreate the situation where there's a clear power structure, where they can be the one reaching out and controlling the terms of engagement. If you fall back into the pattern of being pursued, they get what they want. They're back in control. They're back in the position of holding the power. They're back in the position of not having to be vulnerable. And from their perspective, this is the best case scenario, because now they get the pleasure of pursuit without the terror of equality. The version of you they're attracted to now, the version of you that the avoidant person is attracted to now, is not actually more lovable than the version you were before. It's more of a challenge. You're more mysterious now. You're less transparent about your need. You're less available. You have your own life happening that doesn't center around them. You might have started dating again, or invested in friendships, or found hobbies that light you up. And all of that makes you more attractive in a certain way, not because it makes you a better person, but because it makes you less of a sure thing. This attraction is not the same as love. It's not the same as real desire to build something with you. It's not the same as seeing you for who you are and wanting to show up for that person consistently. It's the desire to win the game you're no longer playing. It's the desire to prove that you still want them, or that they still have the power to make you want them. It's the desire to restore the dynamic where they're in control. And if you were to examine their pursuit closely, you'd notice that it's not actually about you, it's about restoring their sense of power and control. This is why it's so important to stay grounded in reality when the avoidant person starts pursuing. They're not pursuing the real you, they're pursuing the you who's no longer available, the you who's no longer reaching, the you who represents a challenge and a loss. If you were to become fully available again, if you were to drop all your boundaries and open yourself completely, if you were to go back to being the person who centered their entire world around them, the quality of their pursuit would change. It would lose some of its intensity. The neurochemistry would shift, the dynamic would settle, and they would need to find a new way to relate to you, and for many avoidants that's the moment when they'd start to pull away again. Because the point was never to have a relationship with you, the point was to not be the one being left. The test of whether they've actually changed. So how do you know if the avoidant person's pursuit is actually a sign of change, or just a recalibration of the same dynamic? The answer is to pay attention to whether their behavior changes when you become more available. Real change would mean that they continue to pursue you, continue to invest in you, continue to show up and be present even as you become more accessible. They continue to do the work even when it's no longer a challenge. Even when the excitement of the chase is gone. Even when you're just a normal part of their life instead of a distant, unattainable object of desire. But if you notice that the intensity of their pursuit decreases as soon as you start to relax and become more available, that's your sign that nothing has actually changed. They were just operating from a different strategy. The pursuit was never about wanting you in any real sense. It was about not wanting to lose control of the dynamic. It was about not wanting to lose the game. It was about maintaining the illusion that they have the power. You can test this if you want to know for sure. You can slowly become more available. You can respond to their messages. You can agree to spend time with them. You can open the door just a crack and watch what happens. And what you'll probably see is one of two things. Either they immediately pull away because the challenge is gone and the anxiety is back, or they stay but become less enthusiastic. The calls become less frequent, the intensity drops. The romance cools, and you'll realize that the version of them pursuing you was more about your absence than about your presence. Real growth for an avoidant person doesn't mean they suddenly become intensely interested in you. Real growth means they become stably interested. Consistently available. Not more present because you're less available, but present because they've worked to build the capacity to be present regardless. Real growth means they can be with you without needing you to maintain a certain emotional distance or a certain amount of mystery or unavailability in order to keep them interested. They can handle the vulnerability of true closeness. They can tolerate the anxiety that comes with real intimacy. They can choose you even when you're fully accessible. Why you shouldn't fall back in. The temptation to fall back in when the avoidant person starts pursuing can be almost overwhelming, because you've spent so long wishing they would pursue you. You've spent so long wishing they would care enough to fight for the relationship. You've spent so long wondering if you were wrong to leave, if you should have tried harder, if maybe you were the problem. And now it's happening. Now they're saying the things you wanted to hear. Now they're showing up in the ways you needed them to show up. They're texting you good morning. They're asking about your day. They're suggesting future plans. They're finally acting like they care. They're doing all the things that would have saved the relationship if they'd been doing them the whole time. And this is the psychological trap, because your human heart wants to believe that they've learned. Your human heart wants to believe that you mattered enough to change them. Your human heart wants to believe that there's a happy ending where you get to be right about them, where your patience and love were actually worthwhile, where they finally, genuinely chose you. And the pursuit they're offering now feels like the closest thing to that happy ending that's available to you. But this is precisely when you need to stay strong in your boundaries. Because if you fall back in, you're not going to get what you actually need. You're not going to get the consistent, reliable, vulnerable partnership that you deserve. You're going to get what they can give you right now, which is pursuit, intensity, excitement, and temporary presence. But underneath, you're going to get the same avoidance, the same inability to sit with vulnerability, the same fear of true intimacy, the same pattern that will eventually cycle back to withdrawal. And more than that, if you fall back in, you're teaching them that the strategy works. You're teaching them that if they pursue hard enough, you'll relent. You're restoring their sense of control and power, and you're setting up the conditions for the cycle to continue, just in a slightly different form. You'll be available for a while, then your needs will become too much again. Then they'll withdraw, Then you'll reach out again, and they'll remember that they can make you come back by pursuing you. And round it will go, but with both of you more damaged than before. The power of your absence, there's a particular kind of power that comes from your absence that the avoidant person never experienced when you were there. When you were present, you were making it easy for them to avoid themselves. Your presence gave them something to push against. Your pursuit gave them a reason to run. Your need gave them a focus for their blame. Your tears gave them a reason to feel guilty, which they then turned into resentment against you. But your absence, your genuine, complete absence, takes all of that away. It forces them to sit with themselves. It forces them to confront the aloneness they've been running from. It forces them to feel the full weight of their choices, without anyone there to catch them. And for some avoidants, this absence is what finally catalyzes real change. It's what finally makes the pain of continuing in the same pattern greater than the pain of actually facing themselves and doing the work. But it's not a change that benefits you anymore. It's a change that you might never see, because you're not there to see it, and that's actually okay. Because your job is not to facilitate their healing. Your job is to protect your own. The irony of the avoidant pattern is that the thing that would actually help them, real absence, real loss, real consequences, is the same thing that requires you to protect yourself fully. You can't chase them. You can't answer their calls. You can't respond to their pursuit, no matter how validating it feels. Not because you don't care, but because caring is what will destroy your healing. Because responding is what will teach them that the pattern works. Because falling back in is what will trap you in the cycle again. Your life beyond this, the new version of you that emerged when you stopped pursuing, the version that's stronger, more independent, more confident, more self-assured. That's the real you. That's the you that exists when you're not bending yourself into shapes, trying to fit into their limited capacity for closeness. That's the you that has your own life, your own friends, your own interests, your own sense of self that doesn't revolve around another person's availability or unavailability. And that version of you is going to build a life that doesn't need them. That version of you is going to find relationships where you don't have to become unavailable in order to be valued. That version of you is going to learn what it feels like to be pursued for who you actually are, not for how unavailable you've become. That version of you is going to experience what it feels like to be with someone who stays not because they're being chased, but because they genuinely want to. So when the avoidant person starts to chase, and they will, let them chase, but don't turn around, keep walking forward. Build your life, find your peace, keep investing in the people who've stayed. Keep building the things that make you feel alive and whole. And let them learn, finally, what it feels like when the person they've been taking for granted is genuinely gone. That's the only lesson that might actually change them. And it's not a lesson you can teach them by staying. It's only a lesson they can learn by experiencing the full weight of your absence. Recognizing the pattern across their relationships, if you've been paying attention, which you probably have, because people in relationships with avoidance become expert observers of behavior, you might have noticed that this pattern repeats across their life. They get close to someone. That person reaches for them, they pull away, that person tries harder, they blame, they cycle, and eventually that person either gives up and leaves, or they stay and cycle endlessly. And then, after some time of being alone or pursuing someone else, they'll suddenly become interested in an ex. They'll remember how much they miss you. They'll want to reach out and reconnect. Or they'll see you with someone new, and suddenly you're attractive again. This is not actually evidence that they truly love you or that they've changed. This is evidence that the pattern is deeper than any individual relationship. This is evidence that they haven't done the work on themselves. Because if they had done the work, if they had truly changed their attachment style, the pattern wouldn't repeat with the next person. The cycle wouldn't start again. But it does. It always does, until they actually address the root cause, which is their terror of intimacy, not their incompatibility with you. And this is actually a gift, in a way, because it means you can let go of the thought that you were special, that you were the one who finally got through, that if you just tried harder or loved better, things would be different. The truth is that the same dynamic would have eventually played out no matter what you did, because the problem isn't with you, the problem is with how they're wired, and until they rewire it, they'll repeat the same pattern forever. The strength it takes to maintain it. Maintaining your absence, especially when the avoidant person starts to pursue, when they start to show signs of change, when they seem suddenly interested and available, takes a particular kind of strength. It takes the strength to believe in yourself even when they're not. It takes the strength to trust your own perception of what happened, even when they're offering a different narrative. It takes the strength to watch them pursue you and not respond, even though part of you wants to. And this strength doesn't come from being hard or cold or unfeeling. It comes from self-respect. It comes from recognizing that you deserve better than the best they can offer right now, which is pursuit without transformation. It comes from understanding that your peace is more valuable than their attention. It comes from accepting that you can't fix them and you shouldn't try. So when they reach out, when they seem to understand, when they promise to change, you can honor that with a kind of compassionate distance. You can wish them well, you can hope they do the work. But you don't have to be the one to help them do it. You don't have to sacrifice your well-being on the altar of their potential growth. Your absence has already won. The thing that an avoidant person learns through experiencing your actual, consistent absence is something that no amount of words could teach them. They learn that you meant what you said. They learn that their old strategies don't work with you anymore. They learn that there are real consequences to their choices. And most importantly, they learn that they don't have the power they thought they had over your emotional state. And in learning that, something fundamental shifts. Not necessarily their attachment style, that takes years of real work to change, but their sense of themselves in relation to you shifts. You're no longer the person they can manage or manipulate or cycle with. You're not an option anymore. You're gone. And the clarity of that finality is actually the kindest thing you can offer them, even though it doesn't feel kind. So your absence has already won. It's already been victorious. Because every day that passes where you don't break, where you don't reach out, where you don't hope, where you don't wait, every day is proof that you're stronger than the pull to reconnect. Every day is proof that you chose yourself, and that choosing yourself is the most complete ending you could possibly give. Watching them try and fail. If you're still in any contact with the avoidant person after you've become unavailable, you might get to see something interesting. You might get to watch them try, genuinely try, to maintain closeness even as their anxiety kicks in. You might see the moment when they want to reach out but don't. The moment when they're about to be vulnerable but pull back. The moment when they're torn between the pull to connect and the pull to escape. And this watching, this observation, can be either instructive or destructive depending on whether you maintain your boundary. If you're watching with the hope that they'll finally break through, that they'll finally choose you over their fear, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment, because they likely won't. And even if they do for a moment, it won't be sustained. But if you're watching from a place of detachment, if you're observing with curiosity rather than hope, then it can actually help you see something important. They're struggling, they're not evil, they're not deliberately cruel. They're just trying to manage an anxiety that's bigger than their capacity to manage it. And the compassion that comes from that understanding doesn't have to pull you back in. It can actually help you let go. Because when you understand that they're struggling, you can also understand that you can't fix it. And you can be okay with that. The danger of mistaking effort for change. One of the most insidious traps that people fall into when an avoidant person starts pursuing them is mistaking effort for change. They see the effort, the reaching out, the trying, the intensity, and they interpret it as evidence that the person has transformed. But effort is not the same as change. Effort is what happens when someone is motivated by fear or loss or guilt to do something different. Change is when someone has fundamentally reorganized how they relate to the world. An avoidant person can put tremendous effort into a relationship. They can text regularly, they can show up on time, they can use better language about their feelings, they can listen more carefully, they can do all the external things that make a relationship look functional. But if the underlying nervous system response hasn't changed, if they're still flooded with anxiety at the thought of true closeness, if they're still organizing their life around maintaining distance, then the effort is just performance. It's just a more sophisticated version of the same pattern. And the problem with mistaking effort for change is that you might stick around waiting for the effort to become transformation. You might think, if I support them through this effort, if I acknowledge how hard they're trying, if I give them enough positive reinforcement, maybe the effort will become automatic. Maybe they'll actually change. But that's not how nervous system change works. It doesn't happen through reward. It happens through the slow, painful work of rewiring at a neurological level. And that work can't happen with you there offering them comfort and reassurance. That work can only happen when they're forced to face their own fear without an escape route. The clarity that comes from staying away. When you stay away, when you maintain your boundary, when you refuse to become the person they're pursuing, something remarkable happens. You get clarity. You get to see, without the confusion of hoping and wondering, what they're actually capable of. You get to see whether they continue the pursuit or give up. You get to see whether the pursuit was genuine or just reactive to your distance. And this clarity is a gift, because it means you're not living in the ambiguity anymore. You're not wondering if maybe you should have stayed. You're not questioning whether you made the right choice. You're seeing, with clear eyes, exactly what the dynamic was and what it would have continued to be if you'd allowed it. And when you see clearly, when you see that the pursuit fades, or that it continues but in a superficial way, or that it's just another iteration of the same pattern, you can finally completely let go. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a kind of compassionate acknowledgement that this person is not capable of being who you need them to be, and that's okay. It doesn't make them bad. It just makes them not right for you. Understanding your own attachment response, in the aftermath of being with an avoidant person, you might also want to understand how being in that relationship has affected your own attachment style. Many people who end up in relationships with avoidants tend to have more anxious attachment styles. They reach more, they need more reassurance, they check in more frequently. And the avoidant response to this anxious reaching creates a cycle that reinforces both patterns. But here's what's important to understand. Your anxious attachment response is not pathological. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a normal human response to being with someone who's emotionally unavailable. You reached more because they were pulling away. You needed reassurance because they weren't providing it. You checked in because you were afraid they'd disappeared again. In other words, you became more anxious in response to their avoidance. Your nervous system was doing exactly what it should have been doing, trying to maintain connection in the face of disconnection. The fact that this effort didn't work doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means the dynamic was fundamentally incompatible. And now, in your absence, your own nervous system can begin to recalibrate. You can begin to learn that you're safe without constant reassurance. You can begin to develop security not through someone else's consistency, but through your own self-reliance. You can begin to trust yourself to handle disappointment, rejection, and loss without needing someone else to validate your worth. The more secure version of you, one of the beautiful things that emerges from leaving an avoidant relationship, is the development of what's called earned secure attachment. You didn't start out secure. Maybe you came with anxious tendencies, or maybe you developed them in response to the relationship. But through the process of leaving, establishing no contact, and rebuilding your life, you have the opportunity to earn security. This earned security is different from secure attachment that comes from having secure attachments early in life. It's not something you were handed. It's something you built through conscious choice, through walking away from something that wasn't serving you, through choosing yourself even when it was hard, through staying committed to your healing even when the temptation to go back was overwhelming. And this earned security makes you stronger, more resilient, more grounded in who you are, because you know, really know, not just intellectually but in your bones, that you can survive loss, you can survive abandonment, rejection, and the end of a relationship. You can build a life alone. You can find peace without someone else providing it for you. This is the version of yourself that emerges on the other side of an avoidant relationship. This is the version that the avoidant person will see when they look back, and it will be devastating to them, because they'll realize that they lost not someone who was broken and needed them, but someone who has become whole and independent and secure. They'll realize they lost someone who could have been their equal, if they'd been capable of being that. The invitation you're no longer making. When you became unavailable, when you stopped pursuing, when you stepped back, you withdrew an invitation. The invitation to be in a relationship with you. The invitation to be someone's priority. And the loss of that invitation is what they're grieving, whether they consciously know it or not. And your job is to make sure that even if they reach out years from now, even if they seem different, even if they claim they've done the work, your job is to make sure you don't re-extend that invitation unless you're absolutely certain it's what you want. And you probably won't want to, because you'll have built something better, you'll have found peace, you'll have remembered who you are. Your absence is your final word on the matter. It's you withdrawing the invitation, closing the door, and locking it from your side. And that closure is what will finally let you move forward completely. The ripple effect of your unavailability. When you become unavailable, when you stop responding, when you withdraw your energy, the ripple effects are deeper than you might realize. You're not just changing your own trajectory. You're potentially changing theirs. You're potentially activating them in a way that nothing else could. Because for the first time, Someone they cared about is choosing not to chase. Someone they took for granted is choosing not to come back. And this might be the catalyst they need, not because you intended it to be a catalyst, not because you're trying to manipulate them into growth, but because sometimes people only learn when the comfortable options are taken away, when they can't default to the old pattern, when they can't make their familiar moves and get their familiar responses. Your unavailability is saying, the rules have changed, the dynamic is over, you can't have me in the way you had me before. And for an avoidant person, that's a fundamental disruption of their world. It's not something they can manage through distance or control, it's something they have to sit with. The question you stop asking, at some point in your absence, you'll realize that you've stopped asking the question, when will they understand? When will they realize? When will they reach out? And that's the moment you've truly let go. Because you're no longer waiting for them. You're no longer looking for signs of their change. You're no longer hoping that your absence will eventually break through to them. You're just living. You're just moving forward. And they're just gone. This is the shift from active healing to passive acceptance. From I'm leaving to make them change to I'm leaving to save myself. And only the second one is sustainable. Only the second one is real. What waiting teaches you. And when you finally stop waiting, when you've given up on the idea that they'll come around, when you've truly accepted that they might never understand, that's when you've transcended the relationship entirely. That's when you've become free. Not because they changed, not because they finally got it, but because you stopped needing them to. This is the ultimate victory of your absence. Not that it changes them, but that it changes you. It makes you stronger. It makes you whole. It makes you capable of living without them. And once you're capable of that, once you're living that, nothing they do or don't do will touch you anymore. Your absence has won the moment you truly don't care about the outcome. The moment you're building your life not despite the fact that they don't understand, but without any concern for whether they understand at all. The moment you're free. The long game of healing, what you need to understand about your absence is that it's not a short-term strategy. It's not something you maintain for a few months and then see if they've changed. It's a long-term commitment to your own healing. It's a life practice, not a temporary tactic. Because even if the avoidant person does eventually change, even if they do the work and become capable of genuine intimacy, by the time that transformation happens, you'll have already moved on. You'll have already built a life without them. You'll have already discovered who you are when you're not trying to fit into their limited capacity. And at that point, even if they reach out with a genuinely transformed version of themselves, you might find that you're not interested anymore. And that's the point. Your absence isn't meant to bring them back. Your absence is meant to take you forward. It's meant to propel you into a future where you're not dependent on their growth for your happiness. A future where you're whole regardless of what they do. A future where they become a person you used to know, not a person you're still waiting for. The strength in standing still, there's a particular kind of strength that comes from not pursuing, from not reaching, from not trying anymore. It's the strength of acceptance. It's the strength of knowing that you did everything you could and it wasn't enough, and that's okay. It's the strength of allowing someone to face the consequences of their own choices without trying to soften those consequences for them. This strength is not hardness. It's not coldness. It's actually a kind of profound compassion. Compassion for yourself, compassion for them, compassion for the fact that sometimes people can't give us what we need, and sometimes we have to choose ourselves. When you stand still in your absence, when you don't pursue and don't reach, when you let the silence be the silence, you're practicing the most mature form of love. You're loving them by releasing them. You're loving yourself by protecting yourself. You're loving the truth by not pretending that the dynamic could ever work. Your absence as sacred boundary. Your absence is a sacred boundary, not just a relationship boundary, but a spiritual one. It's you saying to the universe, I will not participate in this dynamic anymore. I will not be used as an emotional regulation tool. I will not be the person someone can take for granted. And the moment that boundary becomes sacred, the moment you're not maintaining it for them or to teach them or to make them change, but purely for yourself, that's when it becomes truly powerful. That's when it starts to heal you. That's when it starts to free you. Because a sacred boundary isn't about them. It's about you. It's about honoring yourself so deeply that you won't compromise yourself anymore. And when your absence comes from that place of self-honor, everything changes. That's the absence that actually works. Not to punish them, but to save yourself.